Good morning. We are the Out of Bounds Show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. We're driven by your next GMC Sierra truck, GMC Yukon, Fowler GMC, Pearl Brandon. Pre-owned or new. FowlerGMC.com. We're live in the Bank Plus studio. We welcome in Matt Moscona, ESPN Baton Rouge. His show, After Further Review, Afternoon Drive. Moscona joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. Matt, I appreciate you jumping on. We'll just get right to it. Where do you think Lane Kiffin will coach in 2026?
Hey, Bo. Yeah, this is probably going to shock you. I think he'll coach at LSU in 2026. I'm sure if you ask people who cover Florida, it sounds like they think he'll be in Gainesville. But my contention in following this, Bo, is over the last couple of weeks, I think if you rewind the clock 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I would have said Lane Kiffin was going to be the Florida coach. And I think he probably believed that as well. But last week, things really started to shift. Lane's ex-wife, Layla, his brother, Chris, his wife, Angela, two of their children visited Baton Rouge on Monday, a week ago, as many know. And his last week continued to progress all the way up to Friday, where the LSU Board of Supervisors met in executive session, where I'm told behind closed doors they approved the terms of Lane Kiffin's contract, offered that to him. The terms of that contract leaked on Friday night to Ross Dellinger. I believe everything shifted last week toward LSU. Now, the caveat I always say with this sort of stuff is, like, until the ink is dry on a contract and the coach is standing at a podium, it's never over until it's over. But we saw that with LSU in 2016. I mean, Tom Herman, LSU was playing Texas A&M on Thanksgiving night, and on the crawl, it was Tom Herman was going to be the LSU coach. 36 hours later, Ed Orgeron's at a podium being introduced as the LSU coach. So it's never over until it's all the way over. But at this point, yeah, I think Lane Kiffin's going to be the LSU coach probably, after the Egg Bowl, maybe Saturday, and I think as early as next Monday could be in Baton Rouge.
Okay, so ESPN Baton Rouge, Matt Moscona on the Out of Bounds Show. Do you believe that Lane is still trying to find a way to coach Ole Miss through the playoffs and be the head coach at LSU during and afterwards?
Bo, I think with almost 100% certainty that if the calendar were different, where Lane Kiffin could coach the entire season and then make a decision after the year, that he would absolutely be leaving. He would coach Ole Miss through the playoff and then at the end of the season leave. Kind of like if the calendar matched up like it did in the NFL. I have no doubt that he wants to coach his team. I also, for at least 2 weeks now, have been told with absolute certainty that Ole Miss was not going to let him coach in the playoffs if he's working for another team. And I think that's 100% the right decision by Ole Miss. You can't have your coach distracted working for someone else while your team is in the college football playoff. I mean, can you imagine the entirety of a broadcast with millions of people watching while your coach is working for someone else standing on your sideline? The whole broadcast becomes about who he's leaving for. So, yes, I absolutely believe Lane Kiffin wants to kick the can down the road, delay so he can continue coaching his team. I also believe the powers that be at Ole Miss are not going to allow that to happen. But they're in a complicated spot because they recognize they need to win the Egg Bowl to make the college football playoff. Right. Because remember, I think a lot of people have talked about this now. It's the Jordan Travis rule, right? The quarterback from Florida State. The committee can consider coaches or players that are no longer with the team that would affect the outcome of the games or would have affected previous outcomes. So if they lose to Mississippi State, fall to 10-2, and Kiffin's gone, they could be out of the playoff altogether. So I think from Ole Miss's perspective, they're looking at it saying, we've got to have Lane Kiffin in place this week because he gives Ole Miss the best chance of winning that game Friday, which would all but cinch their playoff berth. And then I think after that, they'd promote Joe Judge to the interim head coach and move on through the playoff without Lane Kiffin.
Okay. LSU insider Matt Moscona on the Out of Bounds Show, ESPN Baton Rouge. Do you believe that he could change his mind over the next few days and stay in Oxford?
Absolutely. I don't think he will, and I'm not sure at this point, Bo, and you may have a much better sense of this than me being in Mississippi, but the people that I've spoken to, and internally there in the athletic department, coaching staff, boosters, and you could just see it from the fan unrest. Man, it sure feels like the Ole Miss collective program is ready for this to be over and ready to move on from Lane. And I can't say that I blame them altogether entirely. I mean, you're here on the precipice of the greatest moment arguably in your program's history, and your coach has a wandering eye for other teams in your conference. So, I mean, maybe there's a better way that you could have gone about doing this that would have enticed him to stay. But my goodness, it sure feels like they've moved on. But that's just my read as an outsider.
Okay. What have you heard about the Chris Kiffin piece? Is a lot of this around Kiffin wants to be the defensive coordinator, and I don't know if you believe that Kiffin's going to retain Baker, or if Kiffin becomes the defensive coordinator. Right now, he's an analyst, a highly paid analyst on the staff. I'm not sure. I was told that, Lane kind of thought that Pete Golding would take the job and do a great job and then move on. But Pete and his wife love it there, and he's making $2.5 million a year. So, I mean, it's still a win for Lane, but it didn't get Chris on the field. Have you heard anything about that, Matt?
Yeah. So I mentioned that. So last Monday, when Layla Kiffin took that trip to Baton Rouge, her and Lane's children were not with them. But Angela Kiffin, Chris's wife, took the trip with their two youngest, Angela and Chris's two youngest. That was the four that made the trip to Baton Rouge. I had been told that the plan would be for Chris to be an on-field assistant. I've also been told that Pete Golding would not necessarily be in play to be the head coach at Ole Miss, and would prefer to come with Lane to Baton Rouge. Now, remember, Pete Golding is from Hammond, which is just like 30 miles east.
Right.
Now, I understand that and again, this may be something you know far more about than me. Like, I'm not, and I don't cover the Ole Miss program every day, but I've found out a lot of things, obviously adjacent, Ole Miss adjacent, just from following the story so closely. But Pete Golding's wife is from North Mississippi and may prefer to stay there.
Right.
I don't know their family dynamics. I'm not going to pretend to know anything about that.
Right.
But what I can tell you is a lot of conversations I had last week sure sound like Pete Golding would come with Lane Kiffin to Oxford, and went so far as, I was hearing in agent circles last week, though, that they were already making phone calls, which I think is, by the way, very, very a normal common practice if you're considering taking a job, to see who might be interested in joining the staff, and Pete was part of those phone calls.
Okay.
So I do believe, long-winded answer here, I do believe Chris Kiffin would come. I believe he would be an on-field assistant, but I think Pete Golding would be here as well. The other thing to keep in mind about Blake Baker, if Jon Sumrall gets a job and Tulane comes open, Blake Baker played at Tulane, and a year ago there was a lot of smoke around Blake Baker. Remember, Sumrall was a finalist for that North Carolina job.
Yes.
And they ended up hiring Bill Belichick. Had they hired Sumrall, there was a very strong feeling that Baker was going to get the Tulane job. So I think there's a really good chance if Sumrall gets a job, if it's either Auburn or wherever, it might well be Ole Miss. But if Sumrall gets a head coach, an SEC head coaching job, and Tulane comes open, Baker could very well be in line to get that Tulane job.
All right, Matt Moscona, Afternoon Drive, ESPN Baton Rouge. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line, talking about all the Lane drama, and it's the biggest story in college football. And he still evidently is going to coach a game. There, Matt, there are still Ole Miss people that are really wired in that I'm talking to that believe that something could happen between now and Friday morning. They got to win that game. So I go back and forth here. I think he's going to coach it, but this thing continues to get weird and crazy. If, let's say, Lane wakes up and decides he wants to stay at Ole Miss or goes to Florida, does LSU go Jon Sumrall, or is there another name or two that you think that Verge and them will strongly consider, Matt?
Yeah, I don't think they have. So I had a conversation over the weekend, Bo, and the way it was expressed to me from the LSU perspective is, like, they don't have a really good number two option. And that's a big part of why LSU is all in on Lane Kiffin. Now, if they don't land Lane Kiffin, let's say he stays at Ole Miss, goes to Florida, whatever the case may be, I think Eli Drinkwitz is on the list. And maybe even a handful of days ago, I would have told you that Drinkwitz was at the top of that list as their plan B. But the fan reaction to that possibility here has been so negative that it feels like that may not actually be the top option. Sumrall would be on that list for sure. Kenny Dillingham from Arizona State, I think, is on that list. And then Blake Baker would be the wild card, where maybe you could sell it as promoting the really popular assistant on an incentive-laden deal. You keep your defensive staff in place. And then you look around, Bo. I mean, there's so many examples in college football of coordinators, of successful coordinators becoming first-time hires at big-time schools and having success. You could look at Dan Lanning, Marcus Freeman, Ryan Day, and Sharon Moore at Michigan, obviously Kirby Smart, Lincoln Riley, Brent Venables. It feels like it's becoming more and more common that major programs are hiring very good coordinators for their first head coaching job and having success doing it. So I think LSU could sell to its fan base promoting Blake Baker if it came to that.
Wow. Okay. Matt Moscona on the Out of Bounds show. All right. Florida, they've been the quiet school out of the three. Would you agree with that, Matt? And we know Scott Strickland. It doesn't surprise me. I mean, he spent a lot of time in Starkville. I've known him a long time. It doesn't surprise me that he's kind of the quiet one of the three. You know this. Layla went to Florida. Her dad was a hell of a player. Blah, blah, blah. It's close to Boca Raton, but these guys are jumping on private jets left and right, as you know, so it doesn't take them long to get wherever they want to go, beach or mountain home. Do you feel like Florida is still very much in it, Matt?
Yeah, I wouldn't rule anything out, Bo. I mean, I'm just you follow one of these things, how unpredictable they can be and how much they twist and turn. Absolutely, it could change. Now, excuse me. The interesting thing about Florida is I believe that 2 weeks ago and beyond that they were very much the team to beat, and we're probably going to get Lane Kiffin. I think two things happened. LSU fired Brian Kelly, and LSU's interest in Lane Kiffin became real and sincere. And the other complicating factor is Ole Miss kept winning. Because I think if you inject some truth serum into Lane Kiffin, he would have never thought this team would be sitting here at 10-1 going into the Egg Bowl. And he could have said, let's say they're 8-3, Bo. He could say, you know what, I gave it my all here. I gave you 6 years. We did some amazing things, but I keep hitting this glass ceiling. And then there would have been more justification to leave. This whole thing with them leading into the playoff has really complicated this from that perspective. I think Lane Kiffin has really leaned on people professionally that he trusts, among them Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, Jimmy Sexton. And it's my understanding they've all told him that they think LSU's the better job. And it makes sense for Nick and Kirby. I mean, they were here, right? And they're part of the championship team here.
Sure.
So I believe all of those dominoes last week started to fall in LSU's favor. And there's nothing that's happened, Bo, that moves me off of that. But again, like you said, it's Tuesday. That game isn't until Friday. A lot can happen between now and Friday and whenever they might make that announcement after the Egg Bowl. So I find it hard to plant my flag and say something is definitively going to happen, because when you do that, you generally end up looking stupid because these things twist and turn.
Right. Yeah. And like you said, I mean, we're trying to predict what a human will do when none of us know what we're going to do in the next couple hours or whatever. So I get it. Matt Moscona, ESPN Baton Rouge, Afternoon Drive on the Out of Bounds show. Do you believe that, I mean, I'm assuming Frank Wilson will be retained because he's kind of the guy there, knows everybody everywhere. Do you believe that Ed Ogeron will be on the staff too? How do you see this shaking out if Lane does take the job?
So the two assistants that I think universally people hear think would have to be retained are Frank Wilson and Corey Raymond.
Okay.
What's interesting is I was also told last week, let's just say from someone very close to Lane Kiffin, that staff and that program, that Lane, if he took the LSU job, would want to bring his running backs coach and his defensive backs coach, which does complicate things. And keep in mind, since Brian Kelly was fired, LSU's only had one decommitment and no opt-outs, which is amazing, especially in this era.
Right.
But a giant part of that is Frank Wilson. Like every single player on the team has a relationship with Frank through the recruiting process, and they love him. So a giant reason how they've kept this roster and this recruiting class together is Frank. So if it's Lane Kiffin or anybody else, if you don't retain Frank Wilson, that feels very not smart for a lot of different reasons. I would say the same for Corey Raymond, who is the guy that really was the sort of the godfather of the DBU era. Brian Kelly did not retain him. We saw what happened. I mean, nobody saw it better than Ole Miss fans in the 55-49 game there in 2023. And Corey is sort of just very quickly rebuilt that room. So as far as the Ed Ogeron piece of it, I have no doubt whatsoever that Ed wants to work again. Like his final buyout payment from LSU is scheduled for next month, for December. So it makes sense. Like him being paid not to work ends next month, so he needs to work. So from Ed's side, his agents pushing Ed for jobs. I don't know that the Arkansas and Oregon State stuff is legitimate interest from those schools. I think Ed would want to coach there. But if he had the opportunity to be a $1 million position coach at a place like LSU, he still has his house in Baton Rouge. I have no doubt he'd do it.
Yeah.
And he and Lane have a great relationship. I mean, they were on staff together for 9 years at Southern Cal and Tennessee. So they're two different stints at Southern Cal than at Tennessee. So I have no doubt that Ed would be a part of the staff if Lane wanted him to be, provided Lane ends up taking the LSU job. There was a report from Matt Zenitz last week that LSU on their side would be open to it, which is interesting. I haven't heard that. I personally haven't heard that from anything. It is important to note that Scott Woodward, the athletic director that fired Ed Ogeron, is no longer the athletic director. So that hurdle may not be there. So I think it's a real possibility that Ed could actually join Lane's staff if he wanted him to.
He is Matt Moscona, ESPN Baton Rouge on the Out of Bounds show, driven by your next GMC Sierra truck at Fowler GMC, Pearl Brandon. What about Austin Thomas? So he was at LSU, then he was with Lane as a GM, then he joined Brian Kelly again. LSU hired Kelvin Bolden, who did a good job at Ole Miss. You hear anything about those two, Matt, being retained? Yeah,
Kelvin, and then also Jai Shuderi, who was there at Ole Miss as well, got hired this offseason as well by LSU. So the pretty universally here, Austin Thomas is very well respected, super sharp, bright guy. I don't personally, I've never had a conversation with Austin about his relationship with Lane. But you read some of the tea leaves, it kind of feels like Austin leaving Ole Miss for LSU maybe didn't sit well with Lane. And also Austin was a Scott Woodward hire. That was not a Brian Kelly hire. Brian Kelly's actually said pretty openly that he never wanted to go. One of the reasons he never took an NFL job is because he liked recruiting and developing and having all the autonomy over the roster and didn't want a GM. And so I think with Scott Woodward no longer being there, Brian Kelly no longer being there, a new coach coming in, it does complicate things for Austin. I know Billy Glasscock is Ole Miss's GM, and my understanding is Lane thinks very highly of him and would want to bring him with him, be it Baton Rouge or Gainesville or wherever. So I do think that does complicate things for Austin. Listen, I mean, anytime there's a coaching change, you always see upheaval like this. It's part of it. And I think that's one where if I had to guess, Lane would want to bring Billy Glasscock with him, and that's probably what would happen.
Okay. Yeah, Billy Glasscock's done a great job. He was on Sark's staff, and he replaced Austin when Austin went down to LSU. I don't think Austin will be unemployed long because of what he and Lane did on the front end of the NIL portal wave. Do you agree with that, Matt?
Listen, I think the world of Austin Thomas. I think he's brilliant. One of the things he did when he came to back, I mean, this is his third stint at Baton Rouge, Bo.
Yeah.
But when he came back, they went up to Seattle and sort of shadowed the Seahawks organization and looked at all the things they did with how they organized player evaluation and salary cap and budgeting. And I mean, it's incredible what they did, what they brought here. So Austin is very bright, very cutting edge. I think the world of him, personally and professionally, to be perfectly candid. And I would hate to see him go, but I also understand that, you hire a new coach, and the coach is going to want to build their staff, both front office and on-field staff, and they have every right to do that.
Sure. Matt, thank you so much, man, for hanging out with us today. Is this the wildest? Look, we've all covered wild, amazing stories being a part of the SEC for a long time. Is this by far and away the craziest, wildest story you've ever followed and covered?
I don't know if I could say craziest and wildest story altogether, but coaching search by a mile. And listen, Louisiana, we're pretty good at screwing things up. I think Louisiana and Mississippi, we have this commonality where a lot of times we're first in everything you want to be last in, and last in everything you want to be first in. But, from Kelly getting fired to the governor getting involved the way he did and going to be national news, to then the athletic director being fired, to then having a press conference to announce an interim AD, and then the university president, and then they promoted the AD to full-time, and then the university president walked it back and then promoted it again. It's been there was a 2-week stretch there at the onset of this that I would say was the wildest 2-week stretch I have ever seen at LSU, and that is a mouthful.
Wow.
Yeah, this has been so bizarre.
Wow. Hey, thanks, man. We appreciate it.
Okay, Bo. Talk soon, man.
Matt Moscona, ESPN Baton Rouge, Afternoon Drive, joining us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. He has Lane going to LSU. Of course, it's always that deal where he's like, look, he could change his mind. And Florida's not giving up. I didn't think they would. And I still think you may need to keep an eye on them the next few days. I didn't buy last week when they were out. I'm not surprised that Scott Strickland and Florida are the quiet one in the group. LSU could definitely be the favorite. It sure as hell looks like it. But not going to count out the Gators. And Keith Carter and crew are fighting their you-know-what off every single minute of every single hour of every day to find a way for him to say yes after the battle for the Golden Egg. Great stuff from Matt Moscona on the Out of Bounds show. If you missed it, it will be on YouTube. Search Out of Bounds Sports. It'll also be on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Search Out of Bounds with Bo Bounds. All right, we're going to stay with our Louisiana people, and we're going to talk a little Thanksgiving food with chef and health coach to the stars, Jermaine Benoit, who is from South Louisiana. And she will join us coming up next on 105.9 The Zone, ESPN. Ole Miss alum, but her family is heavy LSU.